In a quiet neighborhood tucked away from the bustling city center, Jamal Daniels worked tirelessly in his modest studio. The small, narrow room was filled with the scent of oil paints and the sound of soft jazz playing from an old record player. The walls were lined with his creations, vibrant, abstract paintings that seemed to pulse with life. Each piece told a story, whether of personal struggle, social injustice, or hope for a better future. Yet, despite the raw emotion and undeniable talent he poured into his work, Jamal remained relatively unknown. The art world, a realm usually dominated by the wealthy and the famous, had never truly embraced him. As a black artist, Jamal knew that his struggle was twofold. Not only was he fighting for recognition in an industry that often overlooked artists of color, but he also faced the crushing weight of racial prejudice. His art, much of it inspired by the experiences of black people in America, was powerful, but it was also uncomfortable for many in the art establishment, especially the wealthy gallery owners and critics who preferred safe, marketable works. Jamal's studio, located in an old warehouse on the outskirts of town, was a far cry from the pristine, white-walled galleries where the elite art collectors roamed. The flickering lights, the creaking floorboards, and the hum of the street outside created an atmosphere of quiet intensity. In this humble space, Jamal poured his heart and soul into each brushstroke, pushing the boundaries of his craft. Despite his unyielding dedication, success seemed elusive. He had sent countless letters to galleries, participated in local art shows, and even posted images of his work online, hoping to catch the eye of a collector or a gallery owner who would see his potential. But the responses were always the same: polite rejections, empty compliments, and no offers. The world of high art had no place for him, it seemed, and he often wondered if his race played a role in that. Jamal knew the harsh realities of the art world better than most. He had witnessed firsthand how artists of color were often ignored or dismissed, their work undervalued or belittled. And yet, he continued to create, driven by a deep need to express the stories of his people, the struggles, the resilience, and the beauty of black life. For Jamal, art was more than just a career or a hobby. It was a form of resistance, a way to challenge the system that kept him, and many like him, at the margins. On a crisp autumn morning, as Jamal was putting the finishing touches on a new piece, a call came in. It was a local gallery, a small but well-regarded space in the heart of the city. The gallery owner, Michael Sutton, had seen Jamal's work online and was intrigued. He wanted to meet him and discuss the possibility of displaying his art in the gallery. Jamal's heart skipped a beat. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for, the chance to step into a world that had long been closed to him. Michael Sutton was known in the art community as a man with discerning taste. His gallery was a hotspot for emerging artists, and he had helped launch the careers of many who later went on to achieve great success. Michael himself was a middle-aged man with a sharp suit, a carefully manicured beard, and an air of authority that was both intimidating and magnetic. His reputation was built on his ability to spot the next big thing in the art world, and his approval was coveted by artists and collectors alike. Jamal was nervous as he prepared for the meeting. He had seen Michael's gallery from afar, admiring the sleek, modern designs and the polished presentation of the artist's works. It was everything Jamal had ever dreamed of: bright lights, immaculate white walls, and a constant stream of high-profile visitors. But it also represented a world that had never fully accepted him. He took a deep breath and made his way to the gallery, clutching a portfolio of his best work. As he walked through the door, he was immediately struck by the cold, sterile atmosphere. The walls were lined with abstract pieces that felt safe, commercial, and devoid of the raw emotion that Jamal poured into his own work. He was greeted by an assistant, who led him through the gallery and into a private office, where Michael Sutton waited. Michael was seated behind a large wooden desk, his fingers drumming lightly on the surface as he glanced up at Jamal. He was polite, but there was an air of detached professionalism about him. Jamal offered a tentative smile, holding out his portfolio. "Mr. Sutton, it's a pleasure to meet you," Jamal said, his voice a mix of nervousness and hope. "Likewise," Michael replied, his eyes scanning Jamal's face, before falling on the portfolio. "Please, have a seat. Let's take a look at your work." Jamal sat across from Michael, feeling the weight of the moment. He opened the portfolio, carefully revealing each piece. The first painting was a bold, colorful depiction of a protest, a sea of raised fists and powerful expressions. The second was a portrait of a black woman, her face filled with strength and determination, yet her eyes held a sadness that spoke to the pain of being unheard. The third piece was a surreal landscape, a dreamlike scene of a city on fire, with symbols of hope rising from the ashes. Michael didn't react at first, his gaze moving slowly over each painting. He tapped his fingers on the desk, lost in thought. After a long pause, he spoke. "These are interesting," Michael said, his tone cool. "But I'm not sure they fit the direction of this gallery. Our clients tend to prefer more refined, commercial pieces. Something that will appeal to a broader audience." Jamal's heart sank. He had heard this before, his work was too bold, too political, too difficult. Michael continued, barely glancing up from the portfolio. "Your pieces are raw, but they lack a certain sophistication. I'm not sure they'd sell here," he said, his words like daggers to Jamal's spirit. "Perhaps you should try smaller galleries, ones that cater to a more niche audience." Jamal's face burned with frustration. He had worked so hard, poured so much of himself into these paintings, only to be dismissed by someone who didn't even understand them. It wasn't just the rejection, it was the clear undercurrent of racial bias that Michael was oblivious to. He wasn't just dismissing Jamal's art, he was dismissing Jamal as an artist because of his race. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Sutton," Jamal said, his voice steady, despite the anger rising inside him. "I understand." He gathered his portfolio and left the gallery, the door closing behind him with a faint click. As he walked back to his car, he couldn't shake the feeling of disappointment. He had hoped for something more, a genuine appreciation for his work, a chance to prove himself. But instead, he was met with indifference and condescension. Little did Michael know, he had just turned away one of the most promising artists of his generation. Jamal couldn't shake the sting of Michael Sutton's words. The rejection was not just about his art, it was about him, about his identity. It was the constant reminder that in a world where art was valued, his work was not considered worthy. Michael's words echoed in his mind as he drove back to his studio, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. He had spent years honing his craft, and yet, it seemed like the world was determined to dismiss him, to overlook him as if his passion and talent meant nothing. Back in his studio, Jamal placed his portfolio down on the table, the weight of it seeming heavier than before. His mind raced with thoughts of what he could have said, what he should have done differently. But in the end, it didn't matter. Michael Sutton had made up his mind. And it wasn't just about the paintings, it was about Jamal being who he was. Jamal knew that, deep down, it wasn't just his art that was being rejected. It was his very existence. But Jamal wasn't the type to give up easily. He would move forward. He would find other galleries, other avenues to showcase his work. The art world might be close to him now, but he wasn't going to let it stay that way forever. He would make sure that his voice, his story, was heard. A few weeks passed, and life in the studio continued as usual. Jamal spent his days painting, lost in the rhythm of creation, while the city around him continued its fast-paced life. He kept working, determined not to let the rejection define him. Yet, the feeling of being misunderstood, overlooked, lingered in the back of his mind. Meanwhile, Michael Sutton went on with his daily routine. The rejection of Jamal's work was just another moment in the constant stream of artists, each vying for his attention and approval. He had seen hundreds of portfolios, hundreds of paintings, and most of them followed the same formula, safe, predictable, and palatable to the mainstream audience. Michael prided himself on his ability to curate a collection of works that appealed to the right kind of buyer, the kind who could afford to pay millions for a piece of art, the kind who preferred art that didn't make them think too hard. Jamal's work was different. It was raw. It was political. It was an expression of struggle, a loud, unapologetic cry for justice. Michael wasn't interested in that. He didn't want art that challenged his privileged worldview or made him uncomfortable. Michael preferred art that was easy to digest, art that fit neatly into the spaces of the wealthy and well-established collectors who frequented his gallery. Yet, despite his confidence in his judgment, Michael couldn't help but feel a slight unease every time he thought about Jamal's paintings. The emotion in those works had been undeniable, even if he couldn't fully grasp it. Michael couldn't put his finger on it, but there was something about Jamal's art that seemed to demand attention. It didn't conform to the easy expectations of the art market. It made a statement, one that Michael wasn't sure he was ready to hear. And that, more than anything, bothered him. As time went on, Michael's gallery continued to thrive. He hosted exhibitions, sold pieces to wealthy collectors, and enjoyed the respect that came with being a tastemaker in the art world. His reputation remained intact, as did his curated collection of artists who knew how to cater to the elite. Yet, Jamal's work continued to haunt him. He couldn't forget the painting of the protest, the powerful portrait of the black woman, the surreal city on fire. Each piece felt like a mirror, reflecting the truths Michael wasn't prepared to face. But then, something unexpected happened. One day, Michael's assistant brought him a news clipping, a report about an upcoming art auction. The headline caught his attention: unknown artist's work sold for record-breaking amount at auction. The article went on to describe how a relatively unknown artist, whose name had been on the fringes of the art world, had sold a painting for millions. The piece, an abstract work filled with raw emotion, had fetched a price that made waves in the industry. The article didn't name the artist directly, but Michael knew the significance of the story. He had seen a painting like the one described in the auction, an abstract piece filled with vivid colors, chaotic shapes, and an undeniable sense of urgency. It was unmistakable. It was Jamal's work. Michael's heart skipped a beat. He reread the article, his mind racing. Could it be? Had Jamal's art finally been recognized? Michael had no idea how much the painting had been sold for, but the description matched. He quickly searched online for more information, and as he scrolled through the headlines, the reality began to sink in: Jamal's art was worth millions now. The auction had confirmed what Michael had refused to see: Jamal was no longer an unknown artist struggling to make ends meet. He had become one of the most sought-after talents in the contemporary art world. Michael felt a sense of disbelief and regret rising within him. He had turned away an artist whose work was now worth more than most of the pieces hanging in his own gallery. He had dismissed Jamal's talent without understanding it, without appreciating the depth and emotion that infused every stroke of the brush. Michael had been blind to the potential in front of him, too focused on the commercial side of the art world to see the true value of Jamal's work. A wave of embarrassment washed over Michael. He had mocked Jamal's art, dismissed it as too raw, too unrefined, and now, he was faced with the reality that he had missed out on something extraordinary. Jamal's art had not only proven itself to be valuable, but it had also shattered the very notion of what valuable art was supposed to be. It wasn't about adhering to tradition or pleasing a specific audience, it was about the emotional truth captured in the work. Michael sat back in his chair, his mind still racing. He had underestimated Jamal, and now, he had to reckon with that mistake. The question that lingered in his mind was simple yet profound: how could he have been so blind? The answer, of course, was obvious: he had never bothered to look closely enough. He had judged Jamal based on his race, based on the assumption that the artist's background would dictate the value of his work. And now, Jamal had proven him wrong, not only in artistic terms, but in economic ones as well. It was a lesson Michael would never forget: art, true art, transcended all boundaries. And Jamal's work was a testament to that truth. As Michael Sutton sat in his office, the gravity of his earlier dismissal of Jamal's work weighed heavily on his conscience. He had been in the art world long enough to know that some of the most valuable pieces didn't always conform to the expected norms. But the truth of Jamal's art had completely eluded him. Now, as the buzz surrounding the record-breaking auction sale of one of Jamal's paintings spread like wildfire through the art world, Michael's regret only deepened. What had he missed? Why had he been so quick to dismiss an artist whose work was clearly much more than he had initially perceived? He could barely focus on his usual work, distracted by the article about the auction. The painting had been sold for a staggering amount of money, millions. Michael read again, trying to wrap his mind around the sum. It was clear now that Jamal's art was not just valuable in a financial sense, it was a statement. It had transcended the boundaries that Michael and others in the art community had placed on it. It had become a symbol of resistance, a bold voice challenging the status quo. Michael's mind raced as he recalled the pieces Jamal had shown him. The protest scene, the portrait of the strong black woman, and the fiery landscape had all been imbued with emotions and symbolism that, in hindsight, were impossible to ignore. But in his attempt to cater to an audience who preferred safe, marketable art, Michael had refused to see the raw power behind those works. He quickly pulled out his phone and began to search for more details on Jamal and his rise in the art world. The auction sale wasn't just a one-time fluke, it had opened the doors for Jamal to be recognized by major art collectors and critics alike. Within days, Jamal's name had become synonymous with groundbreaking contemporary art, and the buzz only grew louder. The artist who had once been turned away from galleries and overlooked by the elite was now being courted by the biggest names in the industry. He was no longer an unknown figure, Jamal was a sensation. But Michael's surprise didn't end there. As he scrolled through various art publications, he discovered that Jamal had begun to exhibit his work in galleries far more prestigious than his own. Prominent curators had taken an interest in his pieces, and collectors were scrambling to get a piece of his art. Jamal's success wasn't just financial, it was cultural. His paintings were being hailed as revolutionary, capturing the struggle, beauty, and strength of Black identity in ways that no one had seen before. And yet, even as Jamal's star rose in the art world, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that he had missed his chance. His rejection of Jamal, his mockery of the artist, felt like a profound mistake. How had he been so blind? How had he failed to see the brilliance of Jamal's work when it had been sitting right in front of him? Jamal's artwork was more than just aesthetically striking, it was deeply personal, an exploration of identity and resistance. The painting that had sold for millions, the one Michael had so easily dismissed, was a reflection of Jamal's own journey as an artist and as a black man in a world that had often rejected him. Michael hadn't understood that the art was not just about the composition or the colors, it was about the message it conveyed, the story it told, the pain and the triumphs it encapsulated. The world had recognized that, but Michael had failed to. A few days later, Michael received an unexpected phone call that only deepened his sense of urgency to make things right. It was an invitation to a private exhibition hosted by one of Jamal's biggest collectors. The event would showcase some of Jamal's most recent works, and Michael was being asked to attend as a VIP guest. As soon as the call ended, Michael sat back in his chair, conflicted. He had seen the writing on the wall, Jamal's work was in high demand, and this exhibition could be his last chance to get close to the artist. He could have been the one to bring Jamal into his gallery, to be the first to recognize his genius. Instead, he had let his own biases blind him to the truth, and now, he was left scrambling for a second chance. Michael's mind was swirling as he prepared for the event. He couldn't help but feel that he had been out of touch, too focused on trends and status, to truly understand what made art valuable. The art world had always been about profit and reputation, but Jamal's success had shown him that true art was about something far more profound. It was about speaking to the heart of the human experience, about using creativity to challenge perceptions, and about telling stories that needed to be heard. As the evening of the exhibition approached, Michael tried to prepare himself for what he would face. The gallery was located in an upscale part of town, the kind of place where only the most successful and influential figures in the art world gathered. The space was sleek and modern, with bright lights illuminating the walls where Jamal's work would be displayed. Michael couldn't help but wonder what Jamal's art would look like now, after all the accolades and success. Would it be even more powerful than he had originally realized? The night of the exhibition arrived, and Michael found himself standing in front of a new painting by Jamal, one that he had never seen before. The piece was bold, its colors were raw, and its message was impossible to ignore. It depicted a powerful figure standing tall amidst a burning city, surrounded by a sea of chaos. The figure held a flag high, the symbol of resistance. The flames around the figure were not destructive, they were transformative. The city burning wasn't a sign of devastation, but of rebirth. Michael stood in front of the piece, feeling the weight of it. This was art that demanded to be seen, that forced a person to confront their own biases, their own assumptions. This wasn't just a painting, it was a call to action, a declaration of strength and resilience in the face of adversity. As he marveled at the painting, Michael realized something. Jamal's art wasn't just changing the way people saw art, it was changing the way people saw the world. Jamal was no longer just a struggling artist looking for recognition. He was a force, a symbol of everything that could be achieved when talent and truth came together. At that moment, Michael knew that he had missed the boat. The gallery that could have showcased Jamal's work was no longer an option. Jamal was too big for that now. He was an icon, and Michael had been too blind to see it when he had the chance. And, for the first time in his career, Michael realized that art wasn't just about market value, it was about the power to shift perspectives and challenge the world. And Jamal had done just that. Michael sighed and took a step back, watching as the crowd gathered around the painting. He had been wrong, but the art world was all about second chances. Perhaps there was still time for him to learn from this experience. Perhaps there was still a way for him to be part of Jamal's story, even if he couldn't claim to have been the one who discovered him. The weeks following the exhibition proved to be a time of intense reflection for Michael Sutton. His failure to see the potential in Jamal Daniels' work had caused him to rethink his entire approach to the art world. He had spent years curating art that catered to the preferences of wealthy collectors, striving to meet the demands of the established market. But in doing so, he had overlooked something crucial: the power of art to speak to the human condition, to challenge norms, and to convey messages that went beyond aesthetic appeal. Jamal's rise in the art world had taught Michael a valuable lesson. He had seen firsthand how an artist's work could transcend expectations and shake the foundations of what was considered valuable. Jamal's art wasn't just a reflection of his own experiences, it was a testament to the struggles of a whole community, a statement of resilience in the face of adversity. Michael had missed the depth of that message when he first dismissed Jamal, but now, he couldn't deny its power. Despite his regret, Michael knew he had to make amends. He couldn't simply stand on the sidelines and watch as Jamal's career flourished without taking some responsibility for his actions. The guilt of turning away such a talented artist, coupled with the missed opportunity to work with him, weighed heavily on Michael's mind. He knew he couldn't undo the past, but he could certainly try to make things right moving forward. With that resolve in mind, Michael took a bold step. He reached out to Jamal, requesting a meeting to apologize for his earlier judgment and to discuss the possibility of collaborating in the future. He knew that it was unlikely that Jamal would be willing to work with him again, given the way he had treated him, but Michael was determined to at least make the attempt. After all, Jamal's work had not only been validated by the art world, it had been elevated, recognized as groundbreaking. Michael wanted to be part of that journey, even if it meant humbling himself in the process. The response came a few days later, and it was more positive than Michael had expected. Jamal agreed to meet with him, but under one condition: they would meet on Jamal's terms. Michael was eager to oblige. After all, he understood that trust had to be earned, and he had a lot to prove. The meeting took place in Jamal's studio, a modest yet vibrant space filled with the same raw energy that defined his paintings. As Michael walked into the studio, he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. The walls were adorned with Jamal's newest pieces, each one telling a story, stories of pain, hope, and triumph. It was a far cry from the sterile environment of the galleries Michael was used to, but it was full of life. There was no doubt that this was where the magic happened. Jamal greeted him with a reserved nod. He was still wary, understandably, but there was a calm in his demeanor, a quiet confidence that radiated from him. Michael felt the weight of his earlier actions, his dismissiveness, his mockery, and knew that he would have to tread carefully. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me," Michael began, his voice sincere. "I've been reflecting on our previous encounter, and I realize how wrong I was. I want to apologize for the way I dismissed your work. I couldn't see what you were doing, and that was my mistake. Your art, it speaks volumes. I understand that now. Jamal studied Michael for a moment, his expression unreadable. The silence hung between them for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Jamal spoke, his voice calm but firm. You're right, he said. You didn't see it. You didn't see what my art was about, or who I am. But I've moved on from that. I found my place in the art world. I found people who see the value in my work, people who understand the message I'm trying to convey. I don't need validation from anyone who couldn't see that from the beginning. Michael felt a pang of guilt. He knew Jamal had every right to feel that way, and he couldn't blame him for being hesitant to trust someone who had dismissed him so easily. But he also knew that he had changed. He had learned from his mistakes, and he was determined to prove that he was capable of understanding the depth and significance of Jamal's work. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Jamal, Michael continued. I know I don't deserve it. But I want to be part of your journey. I want to help bring your art to the world in a way that respects its true value. If you're willing to give me that chance, I'll do everything in my power to support you in the way that I should have from the start. Jamal's gaze softened, just slightly. There was no immediate forgiveness in his eyes, but there was an acknowledgement, a recognition that Michael understood, that he had taken the first step toward redemption. I don't know if I can trust you again, Michael, Jamal said, his voice quieter now. But I'll give you a chance. Not because you asked for it, but because I believe that art should speak for itself. And I think it's time for you to listen. Michael nodded, grateful for the opportunity to begin making amends. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, and he knew that he had to prove himself, not just to Jamal, but to himself. He had to let go of the old ways of thinking, the notions of what art should be, and learn to appreciate the power of raw, unfiltered creativity. As the meeting came to a close, Jamal spoke again, this time with a hint of a smile. Let's see what we can do together, he said. Michael left the studio that day with a renewed sense of purpose. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, that it would take time to earn back Jamal's trust and respect. But for the first time in his career, he felt that he was on the right path. The art world was changing, and Michael was ready to change with it. He had learned that art wasn't about money, prestige, or following trends, it was about authenticity, about telling the stories that needed to be told. And Jamal Daniels was one of the most important storytellers of his generation. Michael would be damned if he let another opportunity to work with him slip through his fingers. The journey was only just beginning. The weeks following Michael Sutton's meeting with Jamal Daniels were a whirlwind of change. The partnership between the once dismissive gallery owner and the artist whose work he had mocked was unexpected, but it was becoming clear to both men that it was the right move. Michael had committed to supporting Jamal in ways he had never imagined, working behind the scenes to promote his art in a way that was authentic, respectful, and true to its meaning. Jamal, on the other hand, had agreed to allow Michael a chance to prove himself. But this wasn't just about selling art. This was about showing the world the power of Jamal's vision and challenging the status quo of the art world. The first collaborative exhibition they worked on together was a bold departure from the kind of shows Michael was accustomed to organizing. This time, there would be no flashy, mainstream appeal. There would be no pandering to the tastes of the elite. The show would feature Jamal's work in its rawest, most unfiltered form. It was a statement, not just about art, but about identity, resistance, and the struggles that people like Jamal had faced, and continue to face, in a society that often overlooked them. The gallery space was transformed, not with sleek white walls or minimalist displays, but with a vibrant, chaotic energy that mirrored Jamal's paintings. The walls were adorned with large, sweeping canvases of protest scenes, fiery landscapes, portraits of strength, and symbolism of resilience. In the center of the gallery stood an installation piece, a life-size figure made of metal, cloth, and paint, representing the spirit of protest, a visual metaphor for Jamal's own journey as an artist. The figure seemed to tower over the gallery, as though it had been born from the earth itself, rising from the struggles and pain that had fueled Jamal's work. For Michael, this exhibition was more than just a business venture. It was an opportunity to redeem himself in the eyes of the art world, to show that he had learned the true value of art. But more importantly, it was an opportunity to share Jamal's powerful story with the world. The show would be a chance for the art community, and the public, to finally see the artist they had all missed before, the artist whose work had been dismissed, undervalued, and underestimated. It was time for the world to listen to what Jamal had to say. As the opening night approached, the buzz surrounding the exhibition grew. Michael's name, once associated with a more traditional and commercial approach to art, was now being tied to something entirely different, a shift in perspective, a willingness to embrace new ideas and voices. The art community was curious about the direction he was taking, and many were eager to see what Jamal had to offer. The night of the opening, the gallery was packed. The crowd was a mix of established critics, collectors, artists, and curious onlookers, all of them eager to witness what was clearly going to be a defining moment in the art world. Michael stood near the entrance, watching as people filtered in, their eyes immediately drawn to the striking works of art on display. Some murmured in appreciation, others stood in awe, taking in the power of each piece. Jamal was there, too, standing quietly in the background, observing the crowd's reactions. His expression was unreadable, but Michael could see the pride in his eyes as people stopped to admire his work, as people began to see the beauty and importance of the message his paintings carried. As the night progressed, it became clear that the exhibition was a resounding success. Critics who had once dismissed Jamal's work were now raving about it. Collectors who had previously ignored his pieces were making offers, eager to get their hands on his art before it became even more in demand. Michael couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He had taken a chance, and it had paid off. But more importantly, this was the moment Jamal had deserved all along. Later that evening, Michael found himself standing beside Jamal, both of them taking in the crowd that had gathered to celebrate the exhibition. Michael turned to Jamal, a sense of gratitude in his voice. "You've done it," Michael said. "This is your moment. You've shattered every expectation, every boundary they put in front of you. And it's just the beginning." Jamal nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He had come a long way from the artist who had once been rejected by the very establishment that was now celebrating him. But Jamal wasn't just grateful for the success. He had a greater mission in mind. The art world, as much as it had embraced him, still had much work to do. His journey was about more than just making a name for himself, it was about shifting the narrative, about using his art to inspire change. "This is just the start," Jamal replied. "I'm glad people are finally seeing my work for what it is. But this, it's bigger than me. It's about showing the world that the voices they ignore matter. That the stories they overlook are worth telling. That's what I'm fighting for. That's what my art is all about." Michael listened intently, feeling the weight of Jamal's words. He had seen firsthand how art could change perceptions, how it could challenge the status quo, and how it could elevate voices that had long been silenced. Jamal's success was a victory not just for him as an artist, but for all the people who had been overlooked by the art world, the people whose stories had been relegated to the margins. "I get it now," Michael said, his voice sincere. "I see it, Jamal. I see what you're doing. And I'm here to help you amplify that message. I've been blind for far too long, but I'm ready to do the work." Jamal looked at Michael for a moment, his gaze softening. He didn't need to forgive Michael, but there was a mutual understanding between them now. They both recognized the importance of this moment, not just for their professional lives, but for the cultural shift that was underway. As the night drew to a close, Michael stood at the entrance of the gallery, watching the crowd slowly disperse. The exhibition had been a success, but it was more than just a celebration of art. It was a statement about what the art world could become when it opened itself up to new perspectives, to stories that had been silenced for too long. Michael knew that this was only the beginning. Jamal's work would continue to inspire and challenge the world. The road ahead would have its challenges, but Michael was ready to face them. Together, they would break new ground and change the art world forever. For Michael, this partnership was not just a professional triumph, it was a personal redemption. He had found his way back to the true essence of art, to the heart of what it meant to create, to challenge, and to provoke change. The world was ready to listen. And Michael was determined to make sure Jamal's voice was heard loud and clear. As the months passed following the success of Jamal Daniels' exhibition, Michael Sutton found himself in a position he had never anticipated. While Jamal's art continued to gain widespread acclaim, Michael was now thrust into the spotlight in a way that he wasn't entirely prepared for. The once respected, albeit conventional, gallery owner had become a figurehead for change, a champion for an artist whose work had defied all expectations. But as much as he welcomed the opportunity to redeem himself, Michael was learning that not everyone in the art world was ready to embrace this new direction. The art establishment, which had long held sway over what was deemed worthy of attention, wasn't entirely pleased with the success of Jamal's work. Many traditionalists in the field had spent years building reputations on what they considered to be the right kind of art, art that followed predictable patterns, art that appealed to the sensibilities of the elite. Jamal's paintings were disruptive, visceral, and raw. They spoke to a generation's struggles, hopes, and identity. But they didn't fit neatly into the curated boxes that galleries had spent years perfecting. The backlash started subtly. Whispers in private circles. Disapproving glances at gallery events. Critics who once praised Michael for his eye for valuable art now began to criticize him for straying from the classical path. They labeled Jamal's work as too political, too raw, too unrefined. It wasn't what they were used to seeing in galleries, at least, not in the way Jamal presented it. They were uncomfortable with the depth of emotion in each painting, the bold, unrelenting statement that Jamal's work made. It wasn't just art, it was a challenge, and many weren't ready for it. At a prestigious event in New York, one critic, Samuel Cartwright, known for his influence in the traditional art circles, publicly condemned the growing popularity of Jamal's art. His words were sharp, dismissive, and yet, Michael could tell they were tinged with a deep unease. "I see what's happening here," Samuel said during a panel discussion at the gallery. "This is a trend, a political statement masquerading as art. There's a reason why these pieces resonate with a certain demographic, but the real art, the true art, is something that transcends politics. This is not art. It's propaganda." Michael felt a rush of anger but restrained himself, knowing that reacting impulsively would only reinforce the critics' perceptions of him. Instead, he chose to remain calm, understanding that the shift Jamal was creating in the art world was bound to face resistance. Art always did. It challenged ideas. It exposed truths people were uncomfortable facing. "Art is meant to provoke thought," Michael replied in a measured tone. "And if we're being honest with ourselves, that's exactly what Jamal's work does. It forces us to confront the world as it is, not as we wish it to be." Despite his calm demeanor, Michael couldn't ignore the toll the criticism was taking on him. As Jamal's champion, he now found himself at the center of the storm. His gallery was no longer just a place to showcase art, it was a battleground. The establishment had spoken, and it was clear that Michael had picked a side. The pressure began to mount as more influential figures in the art community distanced themselves from him. Some longtime clients started pulling their pieces from his gallery, unwilling to be associated with the controversial nature of Jamal's work. Michael's phone buzzed constantly with calls from collectors, curators, and even other gallery owners, all questioning his judgment. The art world, it seemed, wasn't ready for the kind of change that Jamal represented. They wanted safety. They wanted the familiar. But Michael, for the first time in his life, wasn't interested in playing it safe. He had seen the impact Jamal's art had on people. He had watched as individuals of all backgrounds had connected with the stories embedded in the canvases. The themes of resistance, identity, and survival resonated with a broader audience than anyone in the art establishment had expected. And that was precisely why it was so important to keep pushing forward. In one of their meetings, Jamal could sense the toll the backlash was taking on Michael. He could see the weight of the critics' words bearing down on him, and though Jamal had grown accustomed to the negative reactions from those who didn't understand his art, it was still difficult to see someone else take the brunt of it on his behalf. "Michael, you're doing the right thing," Jamal said one afternoon as they sat together in the gallery's back office, discussing their upcoming plans. "You've given me a platform to speak, to express myself. Don't let them make you doubt your choices." Michael looked at Jamal, a slight smile tugging at his lips, despite the storm brewing in his mind. Jamal's words were a reminder that the work they were doing was bigger than the critics, bigger than the resistance they were facing. It was about more than just selling paintings, it was about creating a space where voices like Jamal's could be heard. "I know," Michael said. "But it's hard, you know? When your whole career has been built on pleasing the right people, it's hard to stand firm when they start to turn their backs on you." Jamal's eyes softened, his voice becoming even more resolute. "Sometimes, you've got to break the system to change it. This art, this movement, it's bigger than any one gallery, any one person. We're not here to cater to them. We're here to show the world something they've been missing. And when they realize it, when they see the truth in it, they'll come around." Michael nodded, knowing that Jamal was right. The art world had always been a space that had evolved slowly, but now, with Jamal's work shaking things up, it was being forced to reckon with its own limitations. It wasn't just about aesthetics or style anymore, it was about truth. And that truth was powerful. As the days went on, Michael began to find his resolve strengthening. He refused to let the pressure from the critics change the path they were on. He would continue to stand by Jamal, continue to showcase the art that had so much to say. The backlash wasn't a sign that they had made a mistake, it was proof that they were on the right track. The exhibition tours continued, and with each city they visited, the crowd grew. More people from diverse backgrounds began to attend the shows, and their support for Jamal's work became louder. The critics may have been skeptical, but the people were not. And in the end, it was the people who mattered the most. Michael knew that he couldn't change the minds of everyone in the art world, but he could stand firm in his belief that art was meant to push boundaries. As he looked at Jamal's work, he knew one thing for sure: this was just the beginning. The true test of any artist, and any person, was how they faced adversity. Jamal had faced it with grace and resilience, and now Michael was learning to do the same. Together, they would prove that the world was ready for this new wave of art, a wave that was bold, unapologetic, and above all, real. As the months turned into years, the controversy surrounding Jamal Daniels' art and Michael Sutton's newfound commitment to change in the art world slowly but surely evolved into something bigger than either of them had imagined. The storm of backlash, though intense, had finally begun to subside. The critics who once labeled Jamal's work as political propaganda now saw the depth of his artistic voice, and even those who had distanced themselves from Michael and his gallery were starting to come back, albeit with more humility than before. They had witnessed the lasting impact of Jamal's work, the conversations it sparked, the movements it inspired, and the minds it opened. Jamal's paintings had moved beyond being a momentary trend or a controversial act of defiance. His art had become a staple in the art world, and his message of resistance and resilience had found its place in the cultural zeitgeist. The art world had changed. And so had Michael. The road to this point had not been easy, and there were days when Michael had questioned whether they had done the right thing. It would have been far simpler to continue with the conventional, safe art world that had once made him successful. But those moments of doubt had always been fleeting, because Michael knew, deep down, that they had pushed the boundaries of what art could be. They had given a platform to a voice that was always meant to be heard, even if it had been overlooked for too long. In an interview for a major art magazine, Michael reflected on the journey he and Jamal had taken together. "When I first met Jamal, I didn't see what was in front of me. I saw his work as raw, unrefined. I didn't understand it," Michael said, his voice calm but confident. "But over time, I realized that what I had missed was the most powerful part of his art. It wasn't just about colors and shapes. It was about the stories he was telling, the stories that had been ignored for far too long. Jamal's work isn't just art, it's a catalyst for change. And that's why I stand by it. That's why I've stood by him." Jamal, for his part, had long since moved past the idea of seeking validation from the establishment. His work had become a voice for the voiceless, a rallying cry for those who had always been on the fringes of society. His art now adorned the walls of major museums and galleries across the globe, his paintings becoming symbols of empowerment, identity, and struggle. But despite his success, Jamal remained grounded. He never forgot the journey it took to get here, and he never lost sight of the purpose behind his art. The success was not just for him, it was for his community, for the people who had supported him when no one else had, and for the generations of artists who would follow in his footsteps. At the opening of his first solo exhibition at a renowned museum, Jamal stood at the center of the room, surrounded by visitors who marveled at his work. Michael stood nearby, his presence a reminder of the journey they had taken together. The two men exchanged a quiet nod, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they had forged over the years. This was not just a celebration of Jamal's art, it was a celebration of their shared vision. Jamal had brought his art to the world, but Michael had helped to amplify that voice, to challenge the entrenched norms of the art world, and to create a space where artists like Jamal could thrive. Together, they had reshaped the very landscape of the art world, pushing it to evolve and grow into something more inclusive, more diverse, and more aware of the world beyond its walls. But even as they stood in the museum, surrounded by the fruits of their labor, both men knew that their work was far from over. There would always be more to do, more artists to uplift, more voices to listen to. The fight for representation, for change, was ongoing, and Jamal's journey was just one chapter in a much larger story. In the years that followed, Jamal continued to use his platform to highlight other underrepresented artists, those whose voices had been silenced for too long. He held workshops, curated shows, and mentored young artists, ensuring that the movement he had helped start would continue to grow. And Michael, though now considered one of the most influential figures in the art world, remained humble, always focused on the next step, the next challenge. Art is never just about the artist, Jamal often said in interviews. It's about the people who experience it, who see themselves in it, who feel something they didn't feel before. Art has the power to change the way we see the world. And if we're doing it right, it changes the world. And change it did. The art world had shifted, and though there were still pockets of resistance, Jamal's work had left an indelible mark on the global stage. The gallery exhibitions that once served as a platform for the rich and powerful had now become spaces for critical dialogue, social activism, and revolutionary ideas. Artists who once felt pressured to conform were now encouraged to break boundaries, to speak their truth, and to bring the stories of the marginalized into the light. For Michael, the journey had been one of personal transformation. He had started as a man consumed with commercial success, focused solely on pleasing the powerful and the wealthy. But through Jamal's art, he had rediscovered the soul of the art world, the heart of what it meant to create and to champion the voices of the unheard. His legacy would no longer be tied to his ability to sell paintings to the highest bidder. It would be defined by his willingness to stand behind an artist who had the courage to speak the truth. As Michael looked back on the journey that had brought him to this point, he knew that he had been a part of something greater than himself. He had been part of a movement that had changed the course of art history, and in doing so, had helped to shift the cultural conversation toward the voices that had been waiting for their moment to be heard. Art is a legacy, Michael thought as he stood in front of one of Jamal's most famous pieces, a massive canvas filled with vivid imagery and powerful symbolism. And this is just the beginning. The world had heard Jamal's voice. Now, it was time for the next generation of artists to make their mark. And Michael Sutton was determined to continue his work, to ensure that the space they had created together would remain open for all those who came after them. The legacy of their collaboration was more than just art, it was a revolution. And that revolution would continue to resonate for years to come.